Hey everyone. So we're gonna kick it off. Thanks a lot for joining. Really excited to be hosting this webinar today. My name is Kathleen. You guys probably know me from the dashboard in a day events that we hosted throughout the Eastern Coast and Western Europe. I'm here today alongside my team. I have Adrian as well. Most of you know Adrian. He's been running the workshops together with me when it comes to Power BI. I also have Horatio from security alongside Cyprian, and also Tudor from the business development side. So before we kick things off, I just want to set the context for today's meeting. So the webinar is intended for us to give an overview on what has been recently developed and deployed in Power BI desktop and Power BI service. We're gonna go through the controls that have been recently published and how powerful they are and how they will help you tell a more powerful story and get more insights out of your data. We're going to discuss about a couple of new features that have been deployed under Power BI Service and under Power BI Desktop that will, let's say, bridge the gap between the data analyst and the data scientist, by leveraging Python and R, but also a couple of really cool features for the native controls. But before we kick things off, let's discuss a bit about the data that we're going to use throughout the examples. So we're going to use some mock-up data that we downloaded in order to simulate a couple of use cases. So we're going to be looking at financial data. We calculated a couple of metrics, total revenue, gross margin, total unit, average unit price, percentage of discount, and so on and so forth. And the first thing that we're going to tackle during today's webinar would be the KPIs. And the way we actually showed so far important KPIs was leveraging a couple of native controls. In this case, I'm using the standard card in order to showcase total sale, total unit gross margin, average unit cost, and percentage of discount. But this raises a couple of challenges. First of all, the cards are built in such a way in which they actually sum up the amount. So it's really complicated to work with them. And, depending on the amount that you're trying to show or the time frame, in some cases, they might throw a blank. And depending on the number of KPIs that you'll need to showcase on the screen, where you're going to need to add multiple cards that will more or less affect the user interface and the experience of the end user with the reports. That's why the next, obviously the next available option that's quite for a long time here within Power BI was leveraging the standard KPI control that factors in a time series, a trend axis, in which you're gonna see, a couple of spikes and how the data flows, how the total sales are actually looking throughout the course of a certain time frame. And obviously, these controls are integrated well and nicely with the time series and the filters. And at a certain point, they help you gain a more, I would say, some more insights on not just seeing a number, but actually understanding how that number actually variated throughout the course of time. So that leads me to a new control that has been published recently, which is the KPI dual control, in which you have the feasibility to compare two values, understand the trend line, and actually leverage the space that you have for Power BI to understand exactly how the different values are connected with one another. In this case, you see that I am using the control to showcase gross margin and total sales. And as I'm navigating through the time series here, I actually see the variance, right, since the first day that this is plotted. And it's quite powerful because it's natively integrated with the slicers. Therefore, based on the starting point that I decide here, it will always compute the variance from the first day that I filter. In this case, for 1st of July 2014, there's an increase here in gross margin with, as you see here on the time series, it increases as I navigate through it. In this case, with a minus of 671%. And this might fit the purpose so that you can combine through different KPIs in just a single control and offer the ones that are consuming the reports a better and a greater experience. The next available control that has been recently published, and it's quite a really powerful one, it's the multi-KPI control, in which you can actually plot an extended number of values. It's extremely interactive. You will see a really powerful trend line. And as I will focus on it, it will actually behave similar to the dual KPI, but it will allow you to basically swap between different metrics, right? If I want to take a look at the total unit, I'm just going to click on it and it's going to swipe, total unit with gross margin or average unit cost. And it will allow me to, as I navigate through time, to see the variance and percentage of discount and how the other values are behaving during the same time series here. So this is also really, I would say, really powerful. Before moving on to another powerful KPI control, thing that Power BI Desktop has gained in the next release is the dynamic title and the fact that you can apply conditional formatting on it. So going back to the data here, you see that, in some of the cases, we're going to use titles to actually tell the user what we're going to showcase in the table below, right? So we're using a standard table, not a metrics table here, and I just activate the title, right, to showcase basically what data am I showing here. And under the title, previously, that was pretty much hard-coded. So whatever you enter there was actually sticking there, regardless of the choices you were making when slicing and dicing the data. But what's really powerful now is that you can actually make the title dynamic. So you see, as I navigate through the slicer and select a different segment, you see that the title automatically changes. And the way this is performed is actually quite straightforward. You see that in the title property here, I've actually connected it towards a measure that I created easily within the fields view, and that's title. And if we're going to quickly navigate to it, we're going to see that, this particular matrix is connected here with this financial table, but we have this measure that we just created. It's the title measure. And clicking on it, you will see that this is just a standard string that I'm entering, and I'm actually appending the selected value for the segment that I'm selecting from the slicer. So this way you can dynamically change titles for any control that's available in Power BI, whether it's native, whether it's downloaded from the marketplace, so that things actually change when you're actually telling that story. Things will dynamically change based on the filtering that you decide here. Obviously, I could have used the date selection as well and add data for mid-market between begin date and end date as well. And that's quite an amazing feature that has been added to the control. Something else that's also powerful when we're talking about really complex reports and a lot of controls and a lot of slicing and dicing, this new version of Power BI comes packed with the new performance analyzer. And the reasoning behind Microsoft adding this feature is that they wanted to monitor the behavior of the controls, whether they stay in a queue to be updated, whether the formula or the measure, the computed column that actually populates that control is being impacted by a really complex DAX formula, so that you know where to work specifically when your report is actually behaving quite slow. So in order to demonstrate this, we're gonna quickly start the recording, and I'm just gonna perform a short filtering here based on channel partner segment and a specific country. And we're going to actually see the duration in milliseconds for each of the specific controls. And we can actually deep dive a bit into it and understand whether that amount of time was spent in running a complicated DAX query or in taking the time to render the display and make geocoding calls or retrieve certain images or URLs, embedded web pages from the web, or time spent in queue waiting for other processes, other controls to load, or bringing in the data. And that's really helpful in terms of understanding what actually drives, let's say, the time when you have a really slow acting report. And this can be performed only in Power BI Desktop. Something that's also added within Power BI Desktop in this particular version, I'm just gonna open up a new instance of Power BI Desktop, is actually a feature that was previously in beta and now has been released as general availability, is the fact that you can now leverage data sources that other employees have published under Power BI service in order to build your own charts and your own reports on top of it, right? So when you're connecting to the data here, you can actually click here on Power BI datasets, and that will automatically redirect you towards your Power BI service. And based on the workspaces that you have access to, you can actually consume the datasets that have been published there, right? So you see all of the workspaces, app workspaces under Power BI service that I can access. And if I'm gonna extend the dashboard in a day one, for instance, you're gonna see a couple of data sets that have been published alongside a couple of reports, right? And let's take one from here, or let's take the standard one with row level security. And if I'm gonna import it, what I'm gonna see here on the field section, we're gonna see the whole tables that have been linked from Power BI service, and I have full access to actually consume that data in visuals for my own report. So think of a scenario where a colleague has spent quite some amount of time developing and creating a really complex model with multiple data sources coming in from multiple files and locations, and he published that in a workspace that you can access. Well, now you can leverage that work so that you don't start from scratch again and repeat that, or you don't need to ask for that PBIX file. You can actually connect to the data set that's populating that report, and you can obviously start building your own visualizations on top of it. It's just a matter of, again, dragging and dropping values here, as simple as that, so nothing complicated about it. So let's say the axis input region, and then say the percentage of revenue for the values, and we're gonna split it up by country. So you see that the data is actually loading quite fast. So going back to the controls again, I kept you a bit in suspense because I really wanted to impress you by showcasing the next KPI control, and that's the multi-level KPI. And you're gonna see that within this one. This is a really powerful new KPI metrics scorecard control that really would help you in getting a better understanding on the variance for a specific metric. It really fits the purpose to create those executive review dashboards that are focusing on a holistic view of the numbers at the company level. But there is quite some prep work to be done in order to leverage this control and use it to its full capabilities. And the first and utmost step is that this control works only with calculated measures. So in order for you to properly use it, you need to start leveraging DAX in order to compute whatever you need to plot here. Whether it's year over year or month over month, or the percentage in certain metrics, you need to start computing that using DAX. And then it's just a matter of plotting that value. And the default behavior is obviously the fact that it's well integrated with all of the slicers, so it automatically filters based on the interval of time and the segments in the country here. But also it allows you to actually deep dive a bit on the trend and look from a timescale perspective how the value for total revenue, let's say, has changed over time. Right, so it's quite a powerful control. But getting back to the preparation needed to be able to use this control, we will need to get raw data. We will need to calculate all of the metrics, sort of simulate a cross-join metric table using Power Query with dimensions and dates, and also add calculated tables to compute the metrics for each dimension and date combination. There is a bit of work to be done. If you're not looking at developing some quite complex metrics, then you should be good to go. For instance, in this case, creating the total revenue wasn't that complicated. The year over year, it's just a division based on the previous year value and the actual value. This is something that we've also done as an exercise in many of our workshops for dashboard in a day. And then afterwards, it's just a matter of linking it to a KPI axis within the control here. The next part I'm going to showcase is something that's built in Power BI for, I would say, 2 releases now, but it has been extensively updated within the last two months. And the latest version that has been publicly released in April comes with a lot of powerful functionalities related to data analytics and how you can actually leverage machine learning embedded within Power BI to get a more better understanding on trends and patterns within your data. And I'm talking about the key influencer visual. For the ones that have been using it, you probably are aware of its power and the fact that Microsoft Research continuously is working on it to add more models behind it to determine more trends within the data. But holistically speaking, what the visual does is it actually uses AI behind the scenes. It uses machine learning.net to run a couple of regressions. In our case, we're running a logistical regression to calculate a couple of key influencers, right? And that's a statistical model that compares different groups to each other. So I'm using some data related to retail in terms of trying to identify the reasoning behind certain ratings, whether they are low, whether they are high. I'm trying to understand what actually drove those ratings to be high or low. So we're trying to actually look on how customers who gave a low score are different from the customers that gave a high score. So if we have multiple categories, such as high, neutral, or low scores or low feedback, we want to look at how the customers that gave a low rating are different from the customers that didn't give a low rating. And the intelligence behind the control is actually searching for patterns in the data. And it looks for how customers who gave a low rating might differ from the customers that gave a high rating. It might find, for example, that customers with more support tickets give a higher percentage of low ratings than the customer with few or no support tickets. And in this case, you see that the way I've actually connected the control with the data. So I'm trying to analyze the rating, right? I'm using a couple of tables here. So within the customer table and the company table, I'm looking at the rating. So I'm trying to understand what actually influences the rating, why a customer is giving me a low rating, why a certain customer would give me a high rating. And I want that explanation, the control, to explain me that rating based on a certain level of dimensions. First of all, would be the theme. The theme is actually the description of the feedback that the customer gives me, right? Whether, I don't like the way I'm interacting with your service. The usability is really poor. I see that you don't focus on security a lot. I navigate slowly through your solution. So actually This would be a sort of an NLP part. So we're detecting sentiments and we're extracting themes out of the feedback to see what kind of themes are the customers addressing when they're giving us a low rating. So we added the theme, we added the role within the organization for the customer that gives us the rating, the company size to see whether that has an impact or not, the region from where the client gives us feedback is from, and the type of subscription that he has. And what we're seeing here quickly is just a matter of 2 to 3 seconds to plot the data and to get these insights. We're seeing that the low ratings are actually given by consumers. So the role within the organization is consumer. The theme that generates the low ratings is actually usability. The other one would be security. The type of subscription that the customers that are giving us low rating is the premier subscription. Usually the company size is less than 5,000. They're mostly coming in from France, and some other themes that are highlighted in the feedback are the navigation and speed. But let's also see, the high feedback, the high rating that we're getting. So we see that 95.92% of the individuals that are giving us a high rating are actually publishers. They have a basic subscription. They're mostly related to the feedback that we're getting is mostly related to price. The companies within 5K and 50K, they're usually coming in from Germany. So in this case, you see when I'm hovering over a specific piece of the control here, Germany, the rating is 1.05 times more likely to be high compared to all of the other values in country and region. And also, you will also get a snapshot on the next type of role in the organization that are giving us high feedback. But the influencers are basically the ones that are publishers. To get a sense on what other problems you can address with this specific control, you can also calculate key influencers for categorical analysis. So not only run logistical regressions, but also run linear regressions to calculate key influencers, and that will actually yield the outcome of a field lecture analysis based on explanatory factors. For instance, if you're trying to analyze price of a house, if you're plotting in data related to prices for houses and also dimensions related to kitchen size and whether it has a pool or not, you will get to see whether having a really large kitchen will have an impact on the house price. And the houses with excellent kitchens generally have lower or higher house prices compared to houses without large kitchens. And another really awesome feature for this control would be the top segment. And the way this is calculated is that the control actually runs a decision tree behind the scenes to find interesting subgroups. And the objective of the decision tree here is to end up with a subgroup of data points that's relatively high in the metric that you're interested in this case, the rating, right? So this could be customers with low ratings, or in the previous examples, houses with high prices. And the decision tree takes each explanatory factor and tries to reason which factor gives it a best split. For example, if you filter the data to include only large enterprise customers, will that separate out customers that give it a high rating versus the ones that give a low rating? Or perhaps it would be better to filter the data to include only customers who commented about security or usability, right? And we'll see here under the segment 1, we can actually deep dive on the data and understand what's happening here. We see that for segment 1, the company is within 5K and 50K. The role within the organization is publisher. The segment contains over 80 data points, so that's around almost 20% of the data. And within this segment, the rating is high, and that's 8 percentage points higher than the average, which is 88.3. And we can actually learn more about the segment and deep dive more in understanding a couple of trends and patterns. You see that the country related to the country and region. Germany has more than 25% of the records here. So Germany is actually, quite a decent amount of high ratings that came from there. France has 60.8% of the records, and then UK with actually 53.5 of the records, among others. They most affect the distribution for this. And you can actually, go through the other top segments to understand what kind of how the control actually clustered the data based on this. What's new inside the control versus the previous month is that now the key influencer visual supports binding of numerical columns added in the explain by. Previously, it couldn't do that. So right now you actually can add integer, numerical columns to understand those trends and patterns in the data. And the visuals machine learning model will actually decide how to bin the data to find the most influential segments of your data. It will actually decide to not bin a numeric column if it detects a strong linear relationships between the column and the target of the analysis. If it's a strong relation, it will just ignore that specific column and it will not be showcased in this analysis whatsoever. Now, going forward, I want to just quickly walk you through a map visual. There aren't many out there when it comes to plotting data on a map. The custom and native control that's built within Power BI doesn't come with so many powerful features. That's why, let's say, a powerful option on the table is leveraging Mapbox. It's a custom control that you can download from the marketplace, and it's now really well integrated with Power BI, in which you can plot data in various ways, and it's really powerful. For instance, here, I can not only plot states within the US, but also I can navigate in multiple ways through the data and actually plotting the size for a specific state based on a specific numerical column. That really gives, I would say, a really powerful aspect to the control because it really works seamlessly and fast, as well as plotting standard data in the form of circles here. And it's really fast when actually filtering the data. So let's say I'm gonna go state by state. You're gonna see that it immediately swaps towards the state that contains the data points. And it has so many configuration options that's, from my perspective, is one of the most powerful controls when it comes to mapping geo data within Power BI. And obviously, clicking on the data point can impact the other controls as well if the relationships behind the scenes are properly built. This would be all, I would say, at a high level about the new map controls in Power BI. What I do want to mention is that we have a Q&A within the webinar. So if you have questions throughout our webinar, kindly type them in, and we're going to address them in the last 15 minutes of the session. So there's a Q&A button right here in the webinar, and you can just address any question. We're going to take them one by one during the last 15 minutes of the workshop. Another powerful control, it's called the value driver tree visual. It's actually a whole platform, I would say. It's a really complex control for Power BI that's really geared towards helping executives and decision makers visualize and analyze various business scenarios and to make effective decisions based on their data. This can be used by anyone from, let's say, the CFO to CEO to any other leadership roles within a company, even towards an analyst, for a wide variety of use cases such as planning, sales forecasting, marketing, headcount planning, supply chain optimization, and even project management. This visual actually shows you relationships between KPIs and specific drivers in a decision tree format, and then simulates any drivers in parallel to see the impact immediately. If you look at it, it more or less is similar to a mind map. and it allows you to easily navigate to different hierarchical views on the data, right? So you see here, I'm just plotting in financial data, the one that I briefly mentioned at the beginning of the call. You see that I can easily expand and collapse the nodes by the tree by clicking on the carrots on the edge of each node. You can, I think the power of it is that you can easily simulate what if scenarios just by dragging the specific slider on each control. And let's take a scenario here where I would like to understand if Lewis Mitchell will next year have a lower amount in sales, for instance, for the consumer part. I'm just gonna pull that in. So let's say for some reason he would miss a couple of months for a particular reason, and I'm now gonna see the impact for the whole tree on that specific scenario. If he's gonna do 54% worse than he did right now, the whole consumers section would be affected with 90%. The entire East section would be affected with 5%, and at a company level, the overall result would be affected with 2%. And that really helps us get a holistic view on the change in a specific scenario all the way towards the highest level in the hierarchy. And as you change the values more and more leaf nodes, you can see, the applied changes on the top of the visual. And I think the power of it all is that you can play around deeply with the scenarios. So using the scenarios section over here on the top, I actually can create multiple scenarios. And I'm gonna check that, on the west side, David would actually increase to 30 million. And then I could create another scenario where on the Mistway side for the industrials, Joe would actually increase to 30 million, right? And then I actually can compare different scenarios one by each other and see, the impacts that the values that I've changed there to compare any number of scenarios one near each other to understand what will be the impact. On top of it all, you can actually deep dive within the data that feeds a certain node so that you can get a detailed pop-up for more information about that node. So that would include information at strand. And let's take Joe Evans, for instance. I'm just going to click on it. And we're actually going to see a lot of details related to Joe. The simulated sales forecast for January, the full year, the breakdown of simulated changes impacts on the full year, the trend here. In this case, I selected the more positive value, but if we're going out and going to charts here, we're gonna see, that for a certain period of time, the status is low. And that's really powerful to understand the impact of every specific choice that you do at a tree at any level within this tree. You can also, as you mentioned, as you saw when I started playing around with the values for the scenarios, as soon as I start changing the what if analysis, I'm seeing actually the impact live in the form of a table right near the right-hand side of the control, and that's really powerful to get an understanding also on the numbers that will drive up the result. Overall, the control offers a lot of features, and it's really complex from a customization level to comparison of certain scenarios, but also due to the fact that you can change a lot of the appearances for the visualization, how the data series are being mapped. So you can create really complex models with custom calculations, but also you can quickly change the assumptions, the what if analysis that you added to revert to the initial state and to start from scratch. That's also really powerful. And on top of it all, you can always change the way the nodes are behaving with each other when interacting with them, how many levels are shown by default, the zoom, whether it will auto scale, the suffix for the scale, the display, and the separator. So you can really customize it on top of what's already pre-built on the format side for the control. So it's one of I would say the top 3 most powerful controls out there that will really help you play a lot with the data and see it in different ways and actually play around with a couple of scenarios and see the impact in the business based on a certain change in the numbers. And you see here, there's also ways to see the data as a table, not only as a tree view. And that's also another way of quickly navigating through it. Quickly going towards Power BI service, because I want to leave 15 minutes towards the end. That's about it for the controls that have recently been updated, and they're gaining popularity in the latest version of May for Power BI Desktop. There are a lot of upcoming features, really powerful features in June, all the way towards redesigning of the application of Power BI Desktop as a whole. It will actually align to the new look and feel of Office 365. Microsoft will switch away from this dark theme here to actually a really light theme. As you saw right now in the latest release, the filters have now been migrated from sitting underneath the controls in a separate placeholder near the visualizations. And basically what will happen is that also the visualization and the fields will change their design completely for a more intuitive user experience and for a more cleaner version. Similar to the filters here, the visualization and fields will also be changed in the upcoming June release. What also has been added as a general availability in Power BI is the fact that now R and Python have general availability, so you can now leverage that to go a step further and navigate away from the need to use what's out of the box or what the community has built, and actually build your own custom controls using Python or R. It's extremely simple to actually use it. I've had this demo a couple of times during dashboard in a day, but only recently after Microsoft announced it as being a general availability function. So now using the R control within Power BI, you can actually write your own R code, and then that will be plotted real time within the control here in Power BI. And what's really, really powerful about that is that this will interact seamlessly with all of the slicers and all of the interactions that you will build for controls in Power BI. Right, you see here that we basically wrote an R code that simulates the exact same behavior as a standard chart, but we added the smoothing spline so that you can more easily see how this specific curve, how we can spot out noisy data. And that's really powerful, and the same goes for Python. It's the exact same approach for Python as well. And you can see that clicking on this slicer will actually affect the control and the code that we wrote to actually plot only data for the Republican Party. And I think it's a really powerful way of going outside and building your own custom control that will fit the purpose of what you would need. Navigating towards Power BI service, a couple of things that are really powerful about it is the fact that Microsoft has now enabled the export to PDF. It's something relatively new as general availability, and one of the important things here is just it's not just exporting as is, but you can have the possibility to export based on a filter that you add on the screen. So, for instance, I want to export only North and Central America. So, if I click on Export to PDF, it will prompt me first of all to select the current values, but also the default values. Default values are basically no filters, no slices, nothing whatsoever. So I'm gonna just export the report as is the first time I'm accessing the page. And it's working quite nicely. It looks really well. structured, as you will see right now, and you can leverage that to export the report in a PDF format and then ship it across via email. Related to sharing your reports with the audience inside the company, one really amazing feature that Microsoft has launched is the subscription here. So for a specific report, you can now subscribe. For instance, I'm gonna subscribe to the campaign analytics here. I can give it a name to the subscription, and what I can do is actually add multiple individuals. Let's add Adrian as well. Gonna add Adrian. I'm gonna say daily snapshot of marketing campaign. And I'm gonna choose what report page is gonna get through email. So let's just go for the campaign analytics. It's gonna happen on a daily basis, and I'm just gonna schedule it like 5 in a couple of minutes, 45 p.m. Central Time, starting with today, and save and close. So in a couple of seconds, Adi and also myself will get a snapshot through email of the report that we will see, first of all, as a static image embedded within the body of the email, but also an URL link for us to navigate directly on the Power BI service and interact further with the reports. And that's really powerful. And also in terms of collaboration and working together to enhance the report, please don't forget that the comment section has been enabled since March. So you can right now actually tag individuals in the comments. Please check the total campaign metric. That will more or less ease the work when you're collaboratively working on reports, and also on the Q&A side, but also on the work aspect in terms of really building this as something that's really helpful for the organization. So right now the comment section is active, and you can work on the Power BI service to leverage that and add more power when you're building reports. So I'm gonna switch now to the questions section, to the Q&A. If anyone has any questions, if anyone has the ability to ask questions with their mics, please do so. If not, you can type in your questions under the Q&A section of this of the webinar. That was all for this month's release in terms of updated controls and Power BI service features. I see a lot of familiar names, so welcome back, everyone. Well, if there are no questions, you can always drop us a note via email if you're curious on how to get set up and leverage those powerful controls to tell a more powerful story around the data and create the model in the back end as good, following the best practices to actually ensure that what you're plotting will actually drive good insights for the organization. Thank you so much. Have a pleasant rest of the week, and be on the lookout for the next webinar on June's release for Power BI. It will be quite an extensive list, also not only related to controls, but also related to features that are coming in terms of DAX enhancements, but also on the Power BI service aspect for building custom menus. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Keep in touch.